All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on this webinar with the Missouri Small Business Development Center at Missouri State University. My name is Chrystal Irons, Director of the Small Business Development Center at Missouri State. Really excited to have all of you here with us today to talk about insurance considerations during this disaster that we're all going through. Excited to have Jeff Eiserman with us with Ollis, Akers, Arney to share his thoughts and expertise with us as our small business owners try to navigate through this really difficult time and make some decisions for their business. A few quick Zoom tips before we jump in and get started. If you'll leave your mics on mute throughout the presentation, that'll help with feedback. Feel free to write all of your questions in the chat box as we go through the presentation, and towards the end we'll have a question and answer section where we'll allow Jeff to kind of answer all of those, and depending on how many people hop on and what questions we get, we may even be able to take turns unmuting mics and raising hands back and forth, so we can kind of see how many questions you all have. If you run into any technical difficulties, feel free to throw those in the chat as well, and I will try to write back to you and troubleshoot those with you if some of those occur. Also want to mention that as you are facing difficult decisions in your business and even after this disaster, the Missouri Small Business Development Center is here to support you. We have counselors across the state. We receive funding from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and with that, we are able to provide confidential one-on-one consulting at no additional fee to our clients. We also offer a variety of training seminars like this one on a lot of different topics, specifically at the Missouri Small Business Development Center at Missouri State. If you visit our website, we're taking appointments daily. There's a link on our calendar. So if you're in the Southwest region, we serve 16 counties. Please feel free to make an appointment and reach out to us, and we'll be as much help to you as we possibly can during this time and even after. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jeff. Thanks so much for visiting with us today and sharing information.
Thank you very much, Chrystal. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here, or at least as excited as one can be, to be talking about this topic and this situation. We represent many different clients in many different industries, and it's really surprising right now. There are some businesses and industries that are doing extremely well, and there are others that are really in a tough spot. And we understand how important it is. In the end, we're in the trust business, and we're in the helping people get through tough time business. That's all I'm here to do, is to help people. And I'm hopeful that today I can help you at least understand your insurance program a little bit more and come up with some ideas and some strategies that can help you get through this time. Big picture, we're going to start out with kind of the basics of insurance. Now, don't fall asleep on me during this, and I know if you say the word insurance, most people's eyes fog over. But it's, if you don't understand at least a little bit of how it works, we're not going to be able to understand how to maybe modify it or make it better where we can help you get through this time. Things we're going to, then we'll talk about some things that you can do and maybe some best practices. And then at the end, we'll have obviously some time to take some questions. If you look at your basics of your insurance program, obviously most people think about it in the way of property. You might have a building or your contents and stuff that you have that you insure, but included in that property policy typically is what's called business income and extra expense coverage, or what a lot of people think about as business interruption. We're going to get into some of the details of that later, but if you think about business interruption, it's basically designed to help you with lost revenue or extra expenses that you have when you have a covered shutdown. And the reason I say covered is because what we're seeing now is typically not thought of as a property or a covered property loss. And we'll get into that here in just a second. You have your general liability. That is your liability that you have as a business owner for bodily injury or property damage that you have in the event of an occurrence. You also have professional liability. So for many of you, you may be in a technology business. You could be an architect. You could be an accountant. That is your professional liability that you have that comes out of your work. And typically when we think of professional liability, it's the financial damages that someone could have as a result of that work. Workers' compensation is injuries that employees would sustain in the course and scope of duty. Now, in this world, you'd think, how does this pandemic or COVID-19 potentially apply to workers' compensation? In some cases, think about it, if you're a nurse and you're working with other people that have this disease, it is highly likely that you could contract this during this time. And that could be considered a workers' compensation claim or something that happened to you in the course and scope of your duty. A BOP policy is just simply a basic a basic insurance policy that combines typically your property and your general liability. And the reason that I point that out is because a lot of you that are smaller businesses might have a BOP policy. And when I think about BOPs, and the reason to bring it back up is because all of these types of policies have what we call a rating basis. In other words, you have to pay premium to the insurance company based on how it's rated. And so, for instance, your liability policy is typically going to be based on sales. A workers' compensation policy, or sometimes even a liability policy, can be based on the payrolls that you have. So the more that you pay people, the more that you would pay in a way of insurance premium, especially for workers' compensation. Property information, what I mean by that is a property policy is going to be rated off the age of your building, if it has a sprinkler system or not, how much you have in the way of contents, do you have a security system that protects that property? And so all of that kind of gets rolled into how the insurance companies actually rate and charge you a premium. What is an audit? Well, for those of you that may or may not know, typically your liability policies and your workers' compensation policies will have an audit done by the insurance company at the end of the policy term. And so they'll come in and say, hey, you estimated at the beginning that you were going to have $2 million in sales and you only had $1.5 million. So in this case, we're going to write you back a check, hopefully, for the difference in what that rating was versus what you originally estimated. Now, over the last few years, for most of my customers, when we've had these audits, you actually end up paying more in premium at the end because, man, the economy's been good. We've been doing tons of business. We've had a lot more payroll, and I'm paying more in premium at the end of the year because I didn't quite know how good it was going to be. Well, I think coming up now, what we're going to see is maybe some situations where some audits are going to generate what we would call return premiums, where you might go over. So if you think about all this in an insurance policy, to get coverage, there's something called a coverage trigger. And typically on a property policy, that coverage trigger is a direct physical loss or damage to covered property. Well, why is this a big deal? With your business interruption or business income coverage, I cannot tell you how many customers and clients I have talked to about, hey, the state of Missouri has put a shelter-in-place order. My business is not an essential business, and because of that, I've had to close. It's a horrible circumstance that a lot of businesses are in right now by having to close. The problem with your property policy and your business income policy is that that government shutdown or that order for you to close is not a direct physical loss or damage to covered property. Typically, what we need there is a fire, a windstorm, a broken pipe that causes water damage to your property. That's what that property policy is designed for. And so if you think about it, nobody could ever envision that businesses would be impacted this way from this type of scenario with this virus. And if we were paying, if the insurance industry was paying for all of those losses because of this, frankly, property policies just aren't designed, nor have they charged the premium to accommodate for that. And man, it would be an unbelievable burden on the insurance industry. So if you think about those type of losses and what actually triggers the policy, there's other things in policies called exclusions. And I know it sounds crazy, but if insurance policies were designed to pay for every loss, they'd be one page long. And all it would say would be, man, when something bad happens, the insurance company is going to write you a check. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way that it works. And there's things called exclusions in these policies. Many of those in property policies, many insurance companies have like a virus or bacteria exclusion. They also have, pardon me here, I had no idea I was going to get that. They have something called course and scope of duty for your workers' compensation policy. So if you were to be injured in the course and scope of your duty, like we talked about before with the nurse, that's a covered cause of loss typically. But for some businesses, that would not be course and scope of duty. So it all just kind of depends. And so all these things get wrapped up into an insurance policy. And if you make a claim, then that claim goes to somebody called an adjuster. And that adjuster for the insurance company is the one that makes the final determination about coverage. So if you look at these common coverage issues, it all gets rolled into one big thing. So because of this virus and the wording in these policies, there are likely some coverage issues for business income as it relates to this coronavirus. Now, what I'll say is going on right now, there are already lawsuits in several states where insureds or people that have insurance policies are suing their insurance companies and asking the courts to make the determination about this loss of income that they're having. Kind of reminds me of what happened after 9/11. Back then, insurance policy, nobody envisioned flying a plane into a building and having that be an act of terrorism. Well, the damage that could come from that is really crazy. And because of that, the government stepped in and created this TRIA Act or Terrorism Risk Insurance Act so that losses for that could get paid. And so if you're an insurance policy holder, most policies you pay into it whether you want to or not. And on some of them, you have the option to pay into this Terrorism Risk Act, where if you have a loss, you will get paid for that if you've contributed to the act. Because of these lawsuits, now how long this will take to come about, we really don't know. But I see the courts going through this process, and I think it's possible in the end that this could end up something similar to what terrorism insurance is today. But what I'll say is nothing is 100%, nothing is certain. And if you're in a situation where you've suffered a business income loss, whether it's going to be covered or not, I would highly recommend that you go ahead, file that claim, turn it in, and let the insurance company make that determination, because all insurance policies are different. They're all written with different language. Now, there's some similarities to them, but for the most part, they're all different. Same thing with an employee. Now, I think if you take a step back and you think about what's going on with like the flu now, if somebody at work got the flu, you're not going to, most employees are not going to think about filing a claim for workers' compensation because they contracted the flu. If you do have an employee that gets this and they believe that they've contracted it at work, it's going to be on them to provide the information or the proof that they did contract this in the course and scope of their duty. But again, I'd highly recommend filing those with the insurance company and let them make that determination. Don't do it on your own. That's why you have that insurance and why you pay for it. If you think about what you should do during this time, we all understand that controlling those insurance costs during this time is a big deal. And so, but we don't want to lose sight on the fact that we're here to protect your assets first and foremost. So you don't want to just drop your building coverage because, my goodness, one, you probably got a loan with the bank and you're not going to be able to drop it whether you like it or not. Two, you don't really want to drop your liability coverage because you're still going to be operating to an extent. You're still going to have to work, and you still have to, if somebody gets injured on your premises now more than ever, they could bring suit against you, and you don't want to have your assets exposed to that kind of loss. Next question you can ask is, can you modify operations? What I've seen now, as you can imagine, so many restaurants right now are struggling because they've basically been forced to close. A lot of them have opened up to curbside service. Some of them are even saying, hey, I'm going to pay my employees instead of having to lay them off or not be able to work. I'm going to let them drive and do food deliveries. Well, that creates kind of a whole different situation from an insurance and risk standpoint if you really think about it. But in your world, you may be able to modify your operations in a way that can help you get through this time and yet not expose your assets or expose your company to certain other risks. You can also do what I call assume a finite risk. And what I mean by that is, for instance, here's the way I would explain it. It's one thing if we increase deductibles on a property policy. So in other words, you may have a property policy that has a $1,000 deductible on your building. Well, you may be able to increase that to $5,000 or $10,000 to save some premium. But at least you know what risk you're taking on, right? If you were to drop like your auto policy or your liability policy, you have no idea what potential risk you could be assuming because, man, in a loss, the sky's kind of the limit with that. But at least if we're just talking about deductibles, we understand and we can more assume a finite risk as opposed to taking on some big loss. I think it's also important for you to sit back and establish some priorities of what's really important to you. So in your world, you may be in a position where you've got just your contents that you're insuring, like desks and chairs and computers and that kind of stuff, and you don't own your building. You may, for a short period of time, may be willing to drop that insurance. I'm not advocating that you do, but it's something that may not be that big of a deal to you at this time, where you're willing to kind of roll the dice for 3 months to see what happens if you can get through it that way. And so by thinking about what those priorities are, you can help kind of pick what's most important and start there. But again, you really want to focus on liability and protecting your top line assets. The last thing I would say are you're likely have contractual demands. Those could be a loan that you have with the bank where you're required to have liability and property insurance on their collateral. It could be a lease agreement where you have in your lease requirements that you maintain liability insurance, workers' compensation, auto liability, and those kinds of things. So whether you wanted to drop them or not, technically you're required to have them based on that contract. You could also have contracts with third-party providers. If you're in the construction business and you're doing work for other people, they're going to require that you have insurance if you're going on their premises. So a lot of the ways to drop this insurance, you may not be able to do that even if you wanted to. If you think about options and what you can do, you could, and here's what I'd say. It is extremely, I'm going to skip to the bottom and then come back to the top. It's extremely important that you be proactive in your communication with the insurance companies. Many insurance companies are going to be open right now to you adjusting your payroll and your sales estimates down if you're not having as much come in or you've had to lay people off and your payroll's down. But you want to be proactive about that, because if you just start reducing those, one, the insurance company may they may have a problem with it, but two, if you can talk through it by adjusting those down, your estimates or your payments for that insurance could be reduced. Or if you've paid for it all up front, you could get some premium back. But on a BOP policy, like we talked about before, those BOPs typically are not rated. They're just kind of a basic rating based on your industry and what you do. So you may not get any return premium there, but for workers' compensation, it's definitely something to consider, and that's an easy way to do it. Your deductibles, like we talked about before, you could increase those deductibles, assume that finite risk, and help save some premium there. By talking with your insurance company, there might be some premium financing options or payment plans that you could get with the insurance company to help extend those payments or give you some options. Some insurance companies are even deferring payments. Now, they're not what I would call forgiving premium payments, but they are allowing folks to maybe push those off for 30 days or 60 days and help work with you to get through this time. It's definitely worth having that communication so that they know exactly where you stand and you're talking about those options. I always like to think about in these times, what are some best practices that you can do? Obviously, you want to stay safe and protect your health. Part of being a business owner is protecting the health and well-being of not only you, but your employees. And the last thing you want to do is put them in a spot where they could be exposed to something or in a dangerous condition that they would have otherwise not been in. I think back to that restaurant example. Many folks that work with restaurants, they may think it's a great idea to get in their car and to drive and deliver food. Well, it sounds good, but man, if you don't understand that, your insurance on your vehicle is your responsibility and your boss or your company that you work for can't assume that risk, you got to be careful about what you're doing. And you don't want to ask an employee to get out there and do that if they don't understand what's in it. Mental health and well-being is critical right now. We think about people, and man, it's so easy to turn on the TV and get wrapped up in all this news. And I like to say we're in a 24-hour news cycle. It seems like right now we're in about a 24-minute news cycle where things change so fast. But taking a break, go outside, get in the air, give yourself some time and get plenty of rest. These are stressful times, and the last thing you want to do is complicate it by not taking care of yourself. I think it's extremely important. We've been doing this with our partners, is over communicating with not only our customers, but our insurance companies so that we can be in the best position possible to help people. Again, we're in the help business. That's why we're here. And if we over communicate in spite of not communicating enough, we can be in a better position to help people. Again, stay informed, but hopefully you won't have the TV on too long and you won't put yourself through undue stress. And then obviously you want to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We are here to help people It's a stressful time, and there are ways to manage those insurance costs and try to figure out a way to get through this. But again, reach out to your partners, reach out to people, stay informed, stay connected, and there is a way to get through it. And I believe in the end, we'll all get through this and be stronger for it better. Chrystal, that's what I had today. I am happy to answer any questions that folks have or talk through anything. Or you get anything in there in the chat box?
So nothing in the chat yet. So if you have any questions, please feel free to throw those up there. You did mention, Jeff, that of course we've heard a lot of these restaurants, like you mentioned, that they are changing their business model a little bit and trying to stay open through delivery when that's not traditionally been a piece of their business. What can those business owners share with their employees, or how might they encourage them to visit with their individual auto insurance?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So generally speaking, a person's individual auto policy is not designed to provide coverage for a business pursuit. It's designed to provide coverage for you driving individually. And so I'd highly recommend that before you ask an employee to do that, you ask them to call their insurance agent and say, hey, I'm going to be delivering on a short-time basis. How's my insurance going to respond, and what can I do? Because as a business owner, you may be able to get some liability coverage for that employee driving, but it's just going to protect the business. And that business auto policy cannot protect or do the physical damage to that employee's car because we don't have an ownership interest in it. So I do think it's important that those employees reach out to their own insurance people. And then as a business owner, you want to verify that they have insurance coverage before you set them loose and turn them loose on the roads driving for you. They may not even have insurance, or if they do, they may have state minimum limits. And frankly, that's not going to be good for you either.
So in that situation, have you had any business owners contact you about, can they pay maybe those increased premiums that the individuals are going to have? Or do you see that they're having increased payments when they do add the business use to their individual policies?
I've seen some owners that have been willing to work through that. I've also seen some business owners that have even bought a company-owned vehicle and had the employees drive those. And so there are a lot of different ways to kind of go about that. But what I'd say is also, as a business owner, you want to run those motor vehicle record checks for those employees, because the last thing you want to do as a business owner is put an employee on the road that maybe has not so good a driving history. And the last thing you'd want to do is have somebody get injured as a result of this, and you were in some ways almost responsible by not checking their motor vehicle records.
In a situation where we do have businesses where they have laid off a good number of their staff, or maybe all of their staff at this point, what kind of information do they need to provide to potentially make an adjustment to their work comp? And then at what point should they reach back out to you or their insurance agent and increase those estimates to make sure that they're, in the end, at the audit, that they're not having to pay extra?
No, that's a great question. So typically on a workers' compensation policy, you'll make an initial estimate up front for what you think the payroll is going to be in those different class codes or different types of work that folks do for you. So in other words, if you're a restaurant and you have people working in the kitchen or in the restaurant, that's one code. But if you have folks that are doing just a back end, like clerical, accounting, bookkeeping work, that's going to be a different estimate. So you'll make those estimates at the beginning of the year. And if you know you've laid off or had to reduce those by 70%, you might think about, okay, 70% less for 3 months, let's say, I should be able to reduce it by X for the year. You have to do a little math there. But you can call the insurance company and reduce that estimated payroll for that time. And you're going to want to keep an eye on it, to your point, Chrystal, where if business turns back around, you're hiring people back, the last thing you want to do is get caught at the end of the policy period and owe a bunch of money for a premium because you reduced it up front and then didn't come back and allocate for it in the end.
And you mentioned it just a little bit. If someone were to get sick at work due to the coronavirus, what kind of guidance can you give to employers specifically around that, and how should they act, or what should they be reporting and when?
I think that if an employee, there's two things going on here, and I want to be careful about one of them. I am not a human resources specialist, and I would highly encourage companies to have a defined policy as it relates to employees that get sick. And do they need, for instance, you'd want to have a defined policy. Do they need to report to their supervisor? Are they required to be off for a certain number of days? How long do they have to be off work before they can come back? All of that stuff. Now, if they believe, so that's one part of it. The second part is if they believe that they did contract it at work and that it's literally almost a work-related injury, I think it's important to let them know that you're going to turn in the claim to the workers' compensation insurance company, and the insurance company will make that determination about whether it's a work-related injury or not. You don't want to do that on your own. Let the insurance company make that determination. I'll tell you, it's probably very rare, unless you're in the healthcare profession like that nurse, that it would be workers' compensation. But again, you don't want to make that determination for the employee up front.
And you mentioned this just a little bit in terms of what happened in 9/11. But do you anticipate any changes to policies that might cover COVID-type disasters in the future? And would those be additional policies people could take out? Is that kind of what's happening with what we've seen?
Yeah, I think what could likely happen is that, and we don't know yet because, again, nothing's certain and it's so early in the process. But I think that there could be literally like a pandemic type of rider, so to speak, that you buy or pay additional premium to have on your policy, so that if this comes about, it actually ends up being covered as opposed to not. And so we'll see how it goes, but I envision a scenario where either you could pay additional money to have it covered on your policy, or frankly, you might even be able to go buy some real specialty kind of policy that it'd be a standalone thing that would potentially respond for that specific event.
Are you hearing from your small business clients? And if so, what are the types of questions that you're getting right now?
That's a great question. We're getting a lot of questions related to that business income and extra expense number. We're getting a lot of questions about, will the insurance company give us a deferral on our premium payments for the next few months? We're getting a lot of questions about what does it look like with my employees if I have to lay them off. We've got a whole separate division here that does human resources consulting. And that team has been working nonstop trying to advise folks about how to handle the new legislation that has been passed just in the last few days. And what does that mean for the employers, employees? And so you can get those laws and legislation and read about it, but actually understanding it and knowing how to implement it is a whole other thing, which is why I'd highly recommend that you get either your human resources people or get with somebody who does understand how it all works so that you know how best to get through it. But those are the big ones that we're hearing a lot about now.
And one question that I see in here is, will policy benefits remain intact if someone is able to get a deferral on their payments for their policy?
Yes. So in other words, if the insurance company says, hey, you don't have to pay us for 30 days, you're still going to have insurance coverage. In other words, they won't do policy cancellations for non-payment. Some won't do that right now because typically if you don't make a premium payment, the insurance company has the right, because you haven't paid the premium, to cancel the policy. And what we're seeing now is in payment deferrals that they're not canceling. They're agreeing to kind of let all this settle down before they go through with it.
Once someone were to make some kind of adjustment to their insurance policy, how long before that goes into effect? And could they see some potential adjustment in their policy payment premium amount?
No, that's a great question. Most people do it, where they would pay a down payment and then a monthly premium installment as you go along. So typically when you make those adjustments, they'll make the adjustment in your premium at the next installment payment. If you have paid in advance or up front for your entire premium, sometimes when you make those, they'll write you a check back, but it may take some time right now to get those through. And as you can imagine, things are busy and kind of crazy right now. So it may take a little bit longer than usual to get through those. But generally speaking, any type of credits or adjustments like that will get applied at your next installment.
There's a question about how stable do you feel the entire insurance industry is with their ability to really weather this storm that we're all in right now?
Overall, and that's why I think it's important when you do buy insurance that you buy it from a company that is financially stable. I believe that at least in our industry right now, there are very few companies that are not set up to get through this kind of thing. I'm hopeful that after a few months of this setback, that we'll kind of get back to some kind of norm. And overall, the insurance companies are set up to withstand something like that. I just don't see a scenario where the solvency of most major insurance companies would come in doubt right now.
Anything that small business owners need to know about having their employees working from home that they should be thinking about, or is there any other potential risk out there in having employees work remotely?
That's we're seeing a lot of that right now. I think that not only do you want to make sure that they have the appropriate technology to be able to work from home effectively, but you also want to make sure that they are in a safe environment. So I know it seems kind of weird, but for instance, my world has changed. I am doing many more remote technology-based appointments, just like we're doing today on Zoom. And what I don't want to have in the background is a family photo or something sensitive or something, because people are different at home, obviously. And when they're attending a meeting or doing something like that, you want to make sure that they're thinking about their surroundings in that way. So generally speaking, it's about safety, technology readiness, and just making sure that we're doing everything to remain business professional and appropriate.
All right. Any other last minute thoughts that you have to share with everybody on the webinar here?
Now, you hit some great things about working from home. I think that nobody could have ever envisioned that we'd have a virus or a scenario like that or like this that would basically shut down large chunks of the economy. It's really hard to believe, but I do think that the better we can all be as far as communicating together, being patient, and thinking through what priorities you have in your business, and there are ways to get through it, especially from an insurance standpoint. Communicate with your provider, talk to them about what's going on. There are ways to get through it, and in the end, again, I really believe that we'll be better off for this and stronger in the end.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, Jeff, and sharing your expertise with us. To everyone on the call, thank you very much for joining us. Please stay tuned for other webinars that we have planned to really try to address all of these different topics that people are trying to navigate through during this time. As my team and I, we were fielding calls. Insurance was one that came up very early on. So I reached out quickly to Jeff for a little bit of guidance, making sure that we were sharing the right message, and just wanted to get that information out to everyone. So again, really appreciate it. As things change, we'll continue to reach out to our partners. Sorry, couldn't spit that out. Our partners, and make sure we keep everybody informed, and know that we are also here to support you at the Small Business Development Center. Reach out and let us know what other questions you have. If there are other topics that you think would be helpful for you and others to know, we would love to hear those as well. Again, I will reach out to everyone who registered and make sure that you get a copy of these slides and Jeff's contact information, of course, as well as ours, if you have any additional information. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon and stay healthy and safe.